In the next several examples, we're looking at the market for eggs. So for each of the next 5 scenarios, we're going to draw a new graph with a supply and demand curve for eggs. So on the x-axis, we have the quantity of eggs demanded or supplied. And on the y-axis, we have the price of eggs. And we have our upward sloping supply curve, denoted by S, and our downward sloping demand curve, denoted by D. And we always assume that we're starting in some equilibrium, Q star and P star. Right, so equilibrium is the point, it's the price at which quantity supplied and quantity demanded are exactly equal to each other. All right, so in scenario number 1, part A, it says the Surgeon General warns that high cholesterol foods cause heart attacks. So eggs are a high cholesterol food. So what might we think would happen in the market for eggs as a direct result of this warning, this health warning? Well, we would probably expect some people to reduce how many eggs they eat or to stop eating eggs altogether. So the demand curve would shift in or to the left, and we can call that new demand curve D prime. Okay, so at the original or prevailing market clearing price, P star, we're now going to be out of equilibrium. So at the original price, the quantity demanded will now be down here, while the quantity supplied will still be up here. In other words, we'll have this excess supply or surplus of eggs. So the surplus for eggs is going to lead to a drop in the price of eggs. So P star is going to start falling. And as that happens, there'll be 2 reactions, one on each side of the market. Consumers, some consumers stop buying eggs, but as the price falls, some consumers will actually buy more eggs. So we'll see this movement towards the right along the new demand curve. On the other side of the market, producers are going to start reducing how much they produce because the price that they can sell their eggs for is falling. And eventually, the quantity demanded and supplied will meet back at a new equilibrium. We'll call it Q star 2. So we see in the end, after all the adjustments have been made, that we have a lower price of eggs. Eggs are cheaper, but also fewer eggs are being bought and sold. So we see that here. We see the lower price, P star 2 versus P star, and we see the lower quantity being bought and sold, Q star 2 versus Q star. In the second scenario, scenario B, we are again considering the market for eggs. So we have the quantity of eggs supplied and demanded, and we have the price of those eggs. And we have our upward sloping supply of eggs and our downward sloping demand for eggs. We begin at some equilibrium, P star, Q star. Okay. And part B says the price of bacon, a complementary product, decreases. So if bacon's a complementary product, that means that eggs and bacon tend to be consumed together. So if one of the products gets cheaper, then consumers are not only going to buy more of that product, in this case bacon, now that bacon's cheaper, but they're also going to buy more eggs because they're going to need more eggs to eat with their now larger amount of bacon that they're buying. So we would expect the demand for eggs to go up, even though nothing happened directly in the market for eggs. It was the market for bacon that saw some changes. But because of the connection between bacon and eggs, we see a reaction in the market for eggs as well. So our new demand curve will be higher. We'll call it D prime. And now let's look at how the market's going to adjust because of the increased demand for eggs. So at the prevailing market price, P star, we now see we're out of equilibrium. The quantity demanded is way out here, while the quantity supplied is down where it was originally. So the difference between the two is going to create a shortage of eggs. More people want to buy eggs than there are eggs available. So this shortage is going to tend to drive up the price of eggs, right? And as that happens, some consumers will actually back off. We'll see a movement to the left along the new demand curve in response to the rising price. On the other side of the market, the producer side, we're going to see production increase in response to the rising price. So we'll have a movement along the supply curve. And eventually supply and demand will meet once more at a new equilibrium, P star 2, Q star 2. Okay, so here we see that in this scenario, eggs end up becoming more expensive and more of them are being bought and sold. In scenario C, we have an increase in the price of chicken feed. Okay, so we have something happening again in a related market, but not directly in the market for eggs. However, we're going to see a response in the market for eggs because of the change in a related market. So let's start again by drawing our supply and demand for eggs and labeling our initial equilibrium, P star, Q star. All right, so when chicken feed becomes more expensive, how is that related to the market for eggs? Well, eggs come from chickens, and so if it becomes more expensive to raise and keep chickens in order to produce eggs, then that's going to be reflected in the market for eggs. And recall that when the price of producing our product changes, that's going to be reflected in a shift of our supply curve, right? It's the producers that are going to most directly feel that higher cost of production. Now, of course, that cost will eventually be passed on to consumers, but we'll see how that actually occurs as our model adjusts to its new equilibrium. So let's start by drawing the response when the price of producing eggs goes up. We're going to see a shift leftward in our supply curve. We'll call it S1. And now at the prevailing market price, P star, we're going to be out of equilibrium, right? At P star, the quantity supplied is now going to be down here, while the quantity demanded has remained where it was. So we're going to have a shortage of eggs, which will tend to drive up the price of eggs. As the price increases, we will see some of our producers actually increase their production of eggs, and therefore there'll be a movement to the right along the new supply curve. However, consumers are going to buy fewer eggs in response to their rising price, so we'll see a movement leftward along the demand curve. The two sides of the market will eventually meet at their new equilibrium, Q star 2, P star 2. At P star 2, the shortage that we initially experienced will now be gone. So in the end, we end up with more expensive eggs. P star is now higher, and fewer eggs are being bought and sold. In the next scenario, part D, we have that Caesar salads become trendy at dinner parties, and the dressing for Caesar salads is made with raw eggs. So we are going to see how that impacts our market for eggs. We start by, again, drawing our supply curve, our demand curve, and labeling the equilibrium P star and Q star. Okay, so if people are making more Caesar salads, they're going to need to buy more eggs. And so we will see an increase in the demand for eggs, D prime. Okay, so now, again, at our prevailing price, P star, we're going to be out of equilibrium. The quantity demanded is out here, while the quantity supplied remains where it originally was. And so the gap between the two is going to create a shortage of eggs. Okay. That shortage is going to drive up the price of eggs. As the price increases, some consumers will decide to buy fewer of them. And so we'll see a movement to the left along the new demand curve. On the other side of the market, on the production side, producers will increase their production in response to rising prices that they can sell their eggs for. And eventually, the two sides of the market will meet at the new equilibrium, Q star 2, P star 2. And the shortage will be no longer a shortage. We see that in the end, the price of eggs is higher and the quantity bought and sold is higher as well. Okay. In the final scenario, part E, we have that a technological innovation reduces egg breakage during packaging. So we're going to see the impact of that on the market for eggs. We draw our upward sloping supply for eggs, our downward sloping demand for eggs. Label our initial equilibrium, our starting point. Okay, so this new technology that's being used, it's going to essentially reduce the cost of getting the eggs to the store because fewer of them will break, so there'll be less waste that the producers have to sort of swallow cost-wise. So that lower cost of production is going to be reflected by a shift to the right in the supply curve, representing a decrease in the marginal cost of production. So we'll call that S prime. Okay, once supply shifts out or to the right, we're going to be out of equilibrium. So at the original market price, this quantity supplied will be way out here, while the quantity demanded is still over here. So the gap between the two is going to create a surplus of eggs. Well, whenever we have a surplus, it puts downward pressure on the price. As that price starts to fall, we see some consumers increase their purchases of eggs, right? Consumers like lower prices, so they buy more. At the same time, on the production side of the market, our producers are going to reduce the quantity supplied somewhat in response to falling prices, right? Sellers don't like lower prices for their products. They like to be able to sell at a higher price. When the price falls, they don't necessarily cover all of their marginal cost of production. So that quantity supplied is going to fall. Eventually, the two sides of the market will meet at the new equilibrium where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. We'll call it Q star 2. And that happens once the price falls to P star 2. So in the end, eggs are cheaper and more of them are bought and sold. Note that the drop in cost of production to producers was eventually passed along to consumers in the form of cheaper eggs in the marketplace.